Hey guys, welcome to my Deadpool versus Wolverine review. Now, I am coming out of that movie basically just 2 hours ago, right? So everything's pretty fresh in my mind. I got my notes all organized in this little thing on the screen. So if you see it get real bright just now, that's why. So let's get started, right? Deadpool, Wolverine, Hugh Jackman, Ryan Reynolds, right? Essentially the quintessential actors for the quintessential characters. Nothing surprising there. Overall, I thought it was a very good film, right? I thought it was a very good movie. I won't go as far as to say it was great, but hold that thought, only because it's still so fresh in my mind and I'm trying to have a little bit of time to bask before I call it great, but for now it was really good, barring great, right? It's probably just right there. Now, story-wise, we'll get to that in a second, because there's a couple things I want to talk about, right? One, it was just like the feel of the movie, the overall vibe. It was just a fun time. It was just fun being in the theater, being a fan, seeing the movie, and just thinking, even let's say at the end of the day, because obviously they brought Hugh Jackman back, and spoiler warning for this whole video. From here on out, you got spoilers, right? I'm not gonna go too heavy into the story, right? It's also for me to remember, because I'm gonna be editing this and just looking, what the fuck am I talking about the story now? But they make a lot of references to it being a cash grab, but even if it is, I didn't feel like, oh, this is just clearly an attempt to get as much money as possible. Like, I had a good time watching the movie. I watched it with my sister and my wife, and I felt like we all had a blast. Tons of laughs all over. I enjoyed all the references, and, they enjoyed a lot of them as casual fans. I'm not saying I'm hardcore as far as the Marvel and X-Men and Deadpool comics. I'm definitely not hardcore, but I feel like I'm at least a little bit, I'm definitely more knowledgeable than they are. But I'm also still on the more casual side of the spectrum as far as being a fan of those particular modes of fiction. Now, overall, if we break this down piece by piece, I didn't really find a whole lot that was fairly negative, but the parts that I did find negative, I'm like, oh, okay, not to say I wasn't a fan, but it was more because those negatives were just very meh things in a fairly good movie. And we'll talk about a little bit more later. Now, as we continue, right, one of the things I loved is just the first 5 to 10 minutes of the movie is just so fun. It's such a, if you haven't seen the clips, if you haven't seen some of it leaked on TikTok, on YouTube, peak entertainment in my opinion. Chef's kiss, right? I was laughing, I was dying, and I was trying not to do my best Backstreet Boys impression, if you know what I'm saying, right? If you've seen the movie, you understand, right? Now, as far as the overall story, right, I'm just gonna break it down as simply as I can without putting too much out there. I thought they did enough where it made sense to bring back, Wolverine, or Logan / Hugh Jackman as a character, as well as a lot of references to obviously the Logan film, which this universe's Deadpool happens to take place in the Loganverse or the X-Men universe, however you want to say it, right? Because again, the multiverse, blah blah. They make jokes about the multiverse later on. For me personally, even being a huge DC fan, I find multiverses just so confusing sometimes. But that's beyond the point. I think they did a good enough job that it was okay, I see why all these things are happening, why you have to bring Wolverine in, why you bring in all these other characters that, either aren't as popular or have fallen out of popularity as far as the current mainstream, what's in as far as characters are concerned, right? As far as, a proper villain, right? You have essentially two main villains in Paradox and Cassandra Nova. Paradox does, he just does a good job of being he's that corporate asshole who's just oh, I want to do things, my way because, blah, 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 I'm the best. Not so much I'm the best, but it's oh, like, I think we can do these things better, and I'm not gonna, you know, wait around and blah, blah, blah. And Cassandra Nova, her character, again, I'm not a huge X-Men fan, in a sense of, like, I've never delved deep into the comics, but with it being, you know, such a huge figure in the comics, at least from what I could tell, you know, I think it was very meh, right? I'm not going to say it's bad because I don't know the character well enough. We're being perfectly honest. I don't know the character well enough to make a judgment on whether the actress did a bad or good job of her portrayal. I will say, as far as the movie is concerned, I think, again, her impact was, I'm not going to say minimal, because obviously she ends up being the big bad, but it didn't feel like I cared enough about her and what she's doing until she happened to be on screen doing all this stuff, which was very menacing, right? For all those of you guys who've seen the movie, you understand what I'm getting at with all this, right? I'm not just, you know, I don't know what to do with my hands. Anyways, but yeah, outside of those moments where she's like trying to be menacing, obviously, or she's just outright being menacing, which I think are good, but her overall impact as a character in the movie, I think, is just, it's fairly minimal for a character that should, you know, for a character of that status, you know, as the main villain, or one of the main villains, right? So overall story, I thought it was good enough that I was entertained the entire time, right? I didn't have a moment where I was like, oh, this is fucking boring, blah, 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 right? I just thought it was good, right? It wasn't particularly amazing. I don't think anything stood out about it in a sense of like, I'm gonna remember all these twists and turns and blah, 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 but it was good enough to keep me entertained for the most part, right? So moving on, if we break it down even further, visually speaking, I found it to be one of, I wouldn't say Marvel's best, but I think it's one of Marvel's better, you know, visual, you know, works of art, so to speak, right? If we look back at the original Deadpool movie, I think, you know, there was a lot of CGI, but with it being the first Deadpool movie, it being 2016, it's like, hey, you could forgive a lot of those things. And I didn't even find them necessarily bad, right? Even in the first movie he references, he was like, yeah, like, look at this giant CGI guy, which happened to be Colossus, blah, blah, blah. I didn't feel like they overdid it with the CGI here, right? There wasn't, you know, if you get what I'm talking about, there wasn't a giant green or animated suit, but there were a couple moments that I was like, looks a little funny, but it didn't pull me out of the movie. It didn't keep me from being entertained. It was just like, I'm always looking for those little weird things, whether it's like practical or, you know, special effects and all that, and I was just like, oh, okay, whatever, right? Especially, anyways, right? But overall, you know, it wasn't like Green Lantern. It wasn't, you know, the theatrical cut of Justice League, but it wasn't like Endgame level either, right? So I'd say it's in that upper echelon, but not like in the high echelon, really. Now, last thing, right? Soundtrack I thought was pretty great overall, right? It kept me immersed, but not so. It didn't feel like they were trying to be, you know, Star Wars with you know, setting the mood every time. The music directly affected how good you felt, and it was like, yo, like, again, it just made it an entertaining experience. I'm not gonna say it was a masterpiece, but they also did a couple things with a couple of the songs, especially like near the end, where I was like, yo, that's actually, I never thought that song would sound so cool, but it does, right? I'm not gonna try and remember, because please forgive me when I say I don't listen to a lot of music, so, you know, I couldn't tell you like a whole lot about it, but if I had to guess, it would, like, for me, it felt like listening to like the soundtrack of like Stranger Things or something from the 80s, and then you just turn up the cinema effect on it and just try and make quote unquote epic. And that's what it felt like. I was like, yo, that sounds cool. Like, that sounds dope. I never thought that those songs would sound so cool, but they do, right? So I very much enjoy the soundtrack. I think and I feel like a lot of people agree when I say a good soundtrack helps a movie a ton, right? Now, if we had to wrap it all up into one, because we are coming close to ending our time on this video, out of 10 Wolverines, right? 10 Biggie points, I would give this movie a solid 8 to 8.5 Deadpools out of 10 Wolverines, right? 8 to 8.5. I might eventually change my opinion after a couple more watches, whether it's in the movie theater, whether it's on, a streaming service of some kind. But overall, it's definitely a solid, good movie in my opinion. I thought they did a good job. I had a fun time. That was the biggest thing. I just had a fun time. It was a fun movie, and I appreciate that more often than not. But at the same time, there are movies that are fun that I'm just like, yeah, it's not a good movie, but it happened to be fun. This, for me, it was a fun, good movie. And I've had a lot of trouble being able to say that for a lot of movies that have come out since, since the dreaded year, if you know what I'm saying. So, that's all from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully get something up on the tubes for next week. I'm going to Amazing Las Vegas Comic Con on Saturday, right? So I'm excited to cover that. Probably watch and live stream a little bit too. So I will see you when I see you guys. So please feel free to, if you were entertained, like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you all. Love you guys. Jiraiya out.